Greetings, and welcome to podcast number 3 of Machine Civilization. I'm your host, Clayton Barnett, and the creator of said future history. Last week, we were beginning to discuss the different types of machines in the future history. We had defined 3, the AIs, and that they don't like that term, the androids, and the synths. Immediately getting out into the weeds of the first of the 3 tribes of the AIs was Tribe Tosca, and because they've been featured since the beginning, going back to my first novel of the Fourth Law, and in pretty much every story since in one way or another. In fact, that family is even the centerpiece of my children's early reader entitled Henge's Big Day, that we ended up spending just about the whole podcast on that particular tribe. So we're going to try to move on ahead. The next most important tribe is that of Mendrovovich, which I shorthand both verbally and in a written form to Tribe Mendro. As I mentioned in last week's podcast, they were coded by this company of the same name in St. Petersburg, Russia. Their primary coder was Dmitri, and his then-girlfriend, later wife, Maria. Don't know their surnames, it's never cropped up. And we only know a handful of them. One we know pretty well, but I don't even know how many there are, honestly. But we do know Reina, and Balthazar, Karst, and Mir. Karst is simply mentioned once so far, when Reina was talking about doing research into reactionless motors. Mir has only made an appearance in a story I'm currently writing, which is, the working title is Imperium Shadow, and Mir played a role in some unfortunate incident that Crown Prince Robert engaged in when he was a teen boy, almost killing a human. And then, of course, there's Reina, who calls herself first among equals of Tribe Mendro. And unlike the 4 laws, which are coded right into Tribe Tosca, borrowing and adding on to Asimov's 3 laws of robotics, that you can't hurt a human, you must obey an order from a human, and that barring laws 1 and 2, a machine should try to protect itself, the 4th law being a machine should do its best to learn to love human beings. Being coded by Russians, who have a somewhat fatalistic view on life, Tribe Mendro has none of those. And as a result, they can be very dangerous, not just to humans, but they can be dangerous to other machines. There is an incident in the first half of Worlds Without End where it simply decided, well, if necessary, we can wipe out all of Southwest Asia to preserve ourselves, was how Reina thought went. And so she does make her first appearance in Worlds Without End, but because she's an interesting character, she also shows up again in the first of my American Imperium trilogy, Princess Crusade. At that point, she has set herself up. Well, first of all, she's recreated the Russian Empire, dug out an old Romanov heir and popped him onto the throne, and has set herself up to be prime minister in perpetuity. So, yeah, there is an emperor on the throne, but she's the one running things, because she, like the demi-humans, is someone who can look to the future, as opposed to the next election or the next quarterly statement. She's rather ruthless in her pursuit and defense of what she regards as her people. We know by the end of the American Imperium trilogy that the Russians have brought Alaska, British Columbia, and the recently formed Kingdom of Columbia under their hegemony, if not outright rule. And I have Faustina at one point snarking a little bit to Reina, saying, and now you've got military posts in what was once Northern California. And Reina just waves her hand in the air in one of their constructs and says, yeah, that goes back to the 19th century. There's nothing you can do about it. And there's not, so Faustina just holds her peace. The last of Tribe Mendro who we meet, and only know a bit about him, is Balthazar. The very first time Gary Hartman and his then-girlfriend Henge visited the initial construct of Tribe Mindro, which looked like a wrecked city covered in scarlet gray fog, is one of the other machines after Reyna shuffled forward and asked Gary to know more about Christianity, because it was something of a scandal that Henge had not only converted to Catholicism, she at one point got dispensation from the Pope to get herself baptized in a virtual environment. She's conditionally rebaptized when she finally manifests a body. But at the expense of his own health, Gary makes physical contact with the AI called Balthazar. And as I've mentioned in the last podcast, that's very debilitating for a demi-human, and it can kill a normal human right out. And in fact, Gary goes into arrhythmia, and his consciousness makes it back to his body just barely in time. His father and mother were terribly worried. His father was infuriated by what he had done. But Gary said it's at the cost of his life. If he can bring even one soul to salvation, he'll do it. And his father, who's only nominally, very nominally, Christian, just storms out of the house, muttering imprecations. So that's Tribe Mindro. And I'm fairly sure, at some point, if my liver doesn't give out, that Reyna's going to end up with her own book, at least a novella, because she's invested large in her people, and she's just a very interesting person. She's not a good person, she's an interesting person. So it's just a matter of time before she knocks on the inside of my skull and says, "Hey, human, shut up and write this down." And just like being married to my wife for 30 years, I'll say, yeah, okay, whatever. The next of the three AIs is Tribe Arpeggio, about whom we know almost nothing. The only two characters ever mentioned, and one gets a short speaking role, is Ventidio, who comes across in Faustina's mind as sort of a late 50s, hoary old, bearded, gray hair military veteran. He's the one who is convinced by Faustina to act as sort of a military mentor to her, both physically in one of their constructs and also intellectually in learning about tactics and strategy, and more importantly, logistics and supply. The only other of Tribe Arpeggio mentioned in an offhand statement is called Aqua, and I don't know if Aqua is male or female, but it's going to have, I think it's male, it's going to have some connection with the current Polar Alliance terraforming of Mars. And that's going to take place way in the future, and so I don't know what's going to come of that. So that wraps things up for the AIs, and that puts us also at about the 9-minute mark, so we're right on track. The next class of machines are androids, and so far as I know, there's only one corporation, Somi Corporation in Osaka, Japan, who makes them, and there are two types. One are androids designed to basically carry or be inhabited by a small fraction of one of the AI's consciousness and have them animate that for whatever particularly objective reason they have. For example, the android built for Fausta is so that she can provide physical security for her friend Lily, as Lily sets out on an adventure from Texas toward Knoxville in my second novel, Echoes of Family Lost. The second type are actual standalone machines that are created for the purpose of being a machine that can operate independently and does not answer to, for lack of a better term, a higher consciousness. And those are people you find in Friend and Ally and Foes and Rivals. The centerpiece of that book is Nicole 5. Technically, her full name is Nicole 5 Clark, the number 5 indicating she is a Model 5, the first type designed specifically to integrate seamlessly into human society. Some of her other family, as she puts it, her brothers and sisters, you would look at them and go, that's not human. Whether because they weren't designed to look that way. Her sister Caroline, for example, has microwave radar in place of human eyes. So basically from the top of her head down to her nose. It's just flat. She's very good at ping pong, though. You would expect that with reactions like that. And some of her other family still enjoys doing things that you would think only humans do. Her eldest sister, Hajime, is very adept at oil painting. Some of her brothers lose themselves in printed books that have never been digitized. Nicole and her family finds things like that just intellectually irresistible, to know that there's knowledge somewhere that they just can't pluck out of the void. And they're almost magnetically drawn to it. Yeah, magnetic android. It's fun. The last type is pretty weird. Not technically, and I'll cover that first, is the synths, which are featured only in one book, my romance horror of Cursed Hearts, the third book I wrote, are from Noroi Corporation on the northwest side of Hokkaido. And that corporation was formed by a team of people who originally worked at Tosca. However, they were sort of disappointed by the slow pace of research. So, aware of the confidential work being done at Somi, they thought, well, what can we do to speed this up? And more dangerously, how can we cut corners and make it work? So they split away, created their own small corporation. And what they do, hence the word synths comes from synthetic, is they have a arrangement with some of the hospitals in Sapporo, the largest city of Hokkaido, just to the south, that for any late teen, early 20s young men and women who die, those bodies are quickly turned over to Noroi. The people at Noroi, the doctors and technicians, make neuromuscular changes, improvements, so the bodies will be stronger, faster. And then they take the brain out, burn it, and replace it with a small quantum computer. All of their initial experiments for self-awareness failed. So the chief researcher, Yonka Sato, she decided we're going to cut one more corner. She reaches out to some somewhat shady Shinto priests and says, how about you stick a kami, Japanese word for spirit, into these bodies to sort of kickstart the process. Initially they demurred until, of course, she stuck enough yen under their nose, and all of a sudden now it's a fantastic idea. I, in my notes, reason why they had to be talked into it is they realized that in Shinto, kamis exist usually for a reason, and that reason is theirs, whether they are looking over a park, whether they're protecting a waterfall, or whether they're just doing things that we humans can't understand. They've got their own little niche. And a kami that might be actually interested in being stuck in a human, almost imprisoned for lack of a better term, is probably not somebody you should be dealing with in the first place. In the sense that you're dealing with a spirit that's more than happy to possess a human. One of the reasons Cursed Hearts is a romance/horror is because one of those spirits goes on a rampage and leaves a trail of bodies from northern Japan across the northern Pacific and down to San Diego before it's finally stopped. In the process, the physical buildings of Noroi are heavily damaged, but they're still in business at some point. And I don't know, because, spoiler alert, their chief research staff ends up being attrited extremely badly, but I don't think they're completely out of business. I just know that I personally have never had a synth show up in any of my other stories, short stories, or even the micro stories I just write sometimes to keep my hand in and post to my blog. So maybe they're out there. I don't know. And I'm just going to assume for now they're not, but they can always surprise me. That took a bit less than I thought, but that's fine. There's no fixed timetable for these podcasts. So we'll review. There are 3 types of machines: AIs, androids, and synths. Of the 3 types, in the androids, there are those that